Hello everybody, this is Christian from Germany. In my new video I will show you how to play against the Petrov Defense or Russian defense. The system I'm gonna present you is called the Nimzowitsch Attack. And this arises after the moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to f6, and at first we are following the main line with knight takes on e5, d6, knight goes back to f3, and then black can capture the e4 pawn. And here exists a main line with pawn to d4, bishop to d3, and so on. But I found out that this leads very often to some boring positions with no aggressive attack, and I don't like to play that. And so we're playing the move knight to c3. And this is the Nimzowitsch attack. Here black has few choices. At first he can take the knight on c3, and then this leads to our well-prepared preparation and Nimzowitsch attack. I like this very much, and this is by far the most often played move here. Then he can retreat the knight to f6. This leads to some sidelines, but this sideline is also played by grandmasters, very high-rated grandmasters, so this move is also okay. And the other logical move is push pawn to d5. This is a very bad move because this move can be refuted. And at first I will show you that blunder. After pawn to d5, you have the simple recommendation queen to e2. And now you can see the problem. This knight on e4 is attacked 2 times and cannot really be defended. So in this variation, in all variations, black will lose the whole pawn. So for example, pawn to f5 doesn't work, of course, off pawn to d3. He will nab the piece. And the other 2 moves, which seems very logical, are also bad. For example, queen to e7, but then the pawn on d5 is hanging. So on the other hand, if your bishop goes to e7, you're attacking this knight twice after knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and you are a simple and healthy pawn up. Okay, at first we look at the sideline after knight goes back to f6. And then we have a simple continuation with d4, and then bishop to d3, and after castle. Now here's an important thing you have to know. We have to make the donkey ears, and the first one is pawn to h3. I call this the donkey ear because this looks like that, yes. And the sense about this move is this is preparing the bishop to g4 and to go for some very calm game. Okay, for example, rook to e8, castle on the king side, and knight to c6. Then we play the other donkey ear, because the knight cannot go to b4 and attack the bishop on d3. This is very common to play. And now I just show you a few moves. For example, if he tries to develop the bishop on the b7, we're just placing the rook here. And after bishop to f4, I think bishop to f4 is a very solid, very good move, the best place for the bishop. Then you have a simple threat here. And this threat, I think, that will be overlooked very often. So if we don't react with this knight against the d4 push, a d5 push, he has some problem. I will show you that. For example, he plays a move like pawn to h6, but then you can push pawn to d5, knight has to retreat, and then here's coming the bishop and is attacking the rook. So he has to block here, then pawn takes and knight takes, and you see this isolated pawn on d6, and that will be a long-term problem for black. For example, you play this very strong positional move, knight to d4. I just make a few moves. Here rook comes and knight here. And you see you have 3 attackers. The knight, bishop, and queen is attacking the d6, and it is really hard to defend this. So this is my recommendation against the sideline. Now let's look for the main variation we're gonna aim for. And this arises after knight takes on c3. The first thing you have to know, very important, take with the d-pawn. Because if you have this structure, it is very common and very dangerous to castle on the queen side, very solid. And that's the plan of the Nimzowitsch attack. Okay, then we just play the main moves, bishop to e7, bishop to e3, knight to c6, queen to d2. And this is really important that you know, don't move the white square bishop. This bishop has only the passive part and is just waiting what's going on. Because if you're playing too early bishop to c4, you give your opponent a chance later on to gain some tempo with pawn to b5. And we don't want to give your opponent some chances. Okay, The next main move here is bishop to e6. And now I recommend to castle immediately, because the dangerous looking move bishop takes a2, sorry, is a big mistake from black. Let's have a look if your opponent tries to capture this pawn and to crush you on the queen side. If he tries to do this, you can be very happy about it, because that doesn't work in the Nimzowitsch attack. After bishop takes on a2, you just close the bishop in with pawn to b3. And here's only one move black can play, and this is pawn to a5, then king to b2, attacking the bishop, pawn runs here, and then you have to remember, don't capture the bishop immediately, play a simple rook to a1, and all will be fine. I simply show you a few moves how to handle this position. After pawn takes, he takes with the bishop, then you have to take the rook, take the bishop, and now white is a clear piece up. I only will show you the next few main moves that you can look how to defend this. Queen to a1, then we have queen to c1, exchanging the queens because we are a piece up. Then check, king to c2, queen gives this check, king to b1, and then there's nothing which black has here. He has nothing. He only can play some moves, try to give some checks and hold the draw, but this is all for nothing. Okay, we're playing against a stronger opponent and he's knowing the theory very well. And then he plays the main move, queen to d7. It is important to play queen to d7. He don't want to allow us to show us the way where he is gonna castle. So very logical here. And then we'll just finish our castle on the queen side with king to b1. And this is the main position we're gonna go for. Now, black has 3 logical choices, I think, and each of them I will show you how to go for some advantage with white and how to have a very calm game. The first variation we're gonna look for is one of the main variations here with castle on the king side. And you have to remember, in the Nimzowitsch attack, whenever black is castle on the king side, don't play the rush with pawn to h3, g4. That doesn't work very well. It is better to push pawn to h4 immediately. And now you can see the simple plan from white. The plan is, after, I would say, every move from black, you can play bishop to d3 and then jump in with knight to g4. This is the main plan we were looking for in, I would say, about 90% of the variations. So it's very easy to remember. Many players would say to place the bishop on g5 will be stronger than the knight. But I think knight to g4 is the more tricky move. And now you can see this why. Okay. Don't want to show you all variations with the red arrows, but I can promise you, in any of these variations, you can following bishop d3, knight to g5. Okay, we're just looking off 2 of them. For example, the first one we're looking for is bishop to g4. This is very logical. Then we follow going with bishop to d3. And here are our 2 logical moves for black. For example, he goes with knight to e5. But then black is in a big trouble, because after knight takes, pawn takes, and bishop takes on h7. This is the shocking move, because black is losing a pawn here. Because after this check, king can take, and then you're attacking black's queen twice. So queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and if you look carefully at this position, white is a pawn up and has a very calm position. Okay, I will show you another variation. For example, after pawn to a6, planning the pawn storm with pawn to b5. But we don't have to hurry, just play our plan. The plan starts with bishop to d3, and then there are 2 logical moves which can be tricked here. And this is bishop to f6 and pawn to h6. Pawn to h6 is a very bad move. And at first, I want to show you a trick after pawn to a6. I think you should know this if you play the Nimzowitsch attack. That's really funny. Now you can sacrifice the bishop. After bishop takes on h6, pawn takes, and queen takes. Now you're threatening checkmate on h7. Okay, he has to blockade the checkmate with pawn to f5. Then we are just threatening checkmate again after knight to g5, checkmate on h7. So he has to forcefully take this knight, and after pawn takes, now black has a really hard time. Queen cannot come in and defend because bishop is hanging with check. So it is very hard to defend this position with black. Okay, we're just looking for the other variation, and this arises after the logical move bishop to f6. And after this, we can also play our tricky repertoire with knight to g5. We're attacking the h7 twice, and black has to do something against this. To take the knight with the bishop is a very bad idea, because after pawn takes, he gets an open rook file, and this is completely crushing. So he has to play the correct move, the computer move here, and this is bishop to f5. But after this, you have a very crushing and tricky move here. Yes, this is pawn to g4. And this is completely crushing, because now the bishop cannot take on g4. For example, bishop takes, then you play knight takes on h7, and this is completely losing. So this cannot be played. Instead, he has to forcefully take the bishop on d3, and after queen takes and pawn to g6, you have the simple order with the pawn run on h5 and h takes on g6. And then you have the open rook file, and this is very, very hard to defend this as black. So this was the most important thing I have to tell you about castle on king side on this position. You have to remember, if your castle is on the king side, you play immediately pawn to h4. And then you have all the options we talked about. Bishop d3, knight g5, and so on and so on. This is a really, really funny opening for white here. Okay, now let's have a look for the other variations when black tries to castle on the queen side. This is a little bit more boring, I would say, but it is. You can also play some tricky moves and gain some advantage. Let's have a look what can happen after a castle on the queen side. In this position, I can strongly recommend the move knight to d4, which is also the main move here. And black's knight on c6 is forced to capture the knight on d4. For example, he ignores the threat and the king goes to b8. But then we have the tactical monster move, and this is bishop to b5. And after, for example, a6, we can take this knight, and after pawn takes, you can see it's a very bad position, a very open position of black's king. So this is very bad. Okay, so I would say knight is forced to take on d4. Okay, knight takes on d4, and then we take with the queen. And now we have two targets, pawn on a7 and also pawn on g7. Both of them are hanging. Of course, pawn and on a7 is more important, so black, for example, can try a move like b6 or like c5. Both of them are okay. And then we just take the pawn on g7. And now black has some forcing moves, and that are to attack the white's queen. Okay, first of them here, attack the queen, attack the queen, attacks the queen, attacks the queen. And after this, the best one black can do is to change up the black bishops, because white is getting an isolated pawn. After bishop takes, f takes. And now we have this wonderful position for white, because white has an extra pawn and the pawn structure of black's camp is very shattered. These pawns are very weak, and also the pawn on d6, it's only a question of time how long this pawn is staying here. So I like this position very much with white, and I can strongly recommend this line to you. Now we look at the last variation when black plays in our main position bishop to f6. This move has the sense of kind of waiting what white we're gonna do here, and he has time on what side he can castle. And after this move, I can recommend to you to play a waiting move now. The waiting move will be pawn to h3. The sense is to push pawn to g4 and placing later on the bishop on g2. And also, if he goes to a castle on the king side now, for example, castle on the king side, now you can run with your pawns. So both of them will be a very good variation for white here. So that's the reason why I like pawn to h3. Okay, But in this position, if we check out the online database, we can see that the only played move here is castle on the queen side. And after this, I think now you should challenge the center from black with knight to d4. And after the forced knight captures, now you cannot take with the queen, of course, because bishop is on f6. Now I recommend to take with the pawn, because you have the quiet threat of pawn to d5, and it is deadly. For example, he plays not a move like d5. For example, he plays the natural move king to b8. That will lead to some nasty problems for black, because now we can push pawn to d5, attacking the bishop. Now after bishop f5, we're attacking the bishop again with g4. And now he has only 2 squares where the bishop can run out. Let's say the bishop retreats to the g6, but then we have the very strong continuation with pawn to f4. We're threatening pawn to f5 and to capture the bishop. So what can he do? He can make some holes with pawn to h6. But then we're also playing pawn to f5. And this bishop does not see a daylight for a while. So he has to retreat the bishop. And now here comes the star move in this position, which is very important in the Nimzowitsch attack. And this is queen to b4. Because now you have so many options to attack black's king. And you can see the defending sides from defending options from black are very limited. So I can strongly recommend this attack to you. Let's give black's bishop another square to defend. For example, bishop to e4, attacking the rook. Rook has to go to g1. And if he will think for a while, he will find out that queen to b4 is a very deadly move also in this position. So this bishop has to do something. For example, now bishop to f3, attacking the rook. This is a very logical move. But this is immediately losing, because after tricky, bishop takes on a7 check. And after king takes, queen check, king goes back, and queen takes the bishop on f3. And this position, I would say, is losing. The reason for that, I can show you in only few moves. At first, for example, rook to e8, for example here, and then we can, if we want, push this pawn, the bishop goes back, yes. But the more important in this position are the next 3 key moves here. The first one is queen b3. And now you can see the bishop to b5, bishop to c6, and then nothing will gonna defend on black's king side. Later on you can play queen to b4, can come in with the rook here, and then it's game over. So you can see how dangerous this Nimzowitsch attack can be if black plays not 400% correctly. Okay. That's all, guys. I hope you liked my new video and found out something new and interesting stuff for your own chess repertoire. I hope you liked this video and I wish you much fun with your chess. Bye bye.